There we go. Welcome to Evolution Hour, our latest show on the road here. Whee! And we're in slightly a different format because during the recent fires in our area, my brother came down to crash here because he lived up on Mount Spokane, which was being threatened. And he looked at my computer to find out certain little foibles it was having and decided, holy shit, you need to tinker with some stuff. So he got me a new keyboard and a new mouse. And we got the old high definition set that I'd had stuck down in the basement doing nothing because it was replaced by a newer thing. We reconfigured to make it the dual screen mode that all the really swell kids have. So now I have my standard monitor on the one side and then my 40-inch high definition, which doesn't actually have the resolution of the other unit, but it's perfectly fine for keeping my spreadsheets and material that I can deal with in a handier way. So I can put more crap open. And also gave me a cute little wireless mouse that I can use with this unit, which allows me to be ever so much nicer on the high end of stuff. So let us get our patrons thanked, everybody. Okie doke. Our colleagues, Hendril, Eric, Saris, our researchers, Barbara, Ian, Convert, Stephen, James, History, Paulogia, Pleasure, Benjamin, Slava, Speed of Sound, DM Wing, our assistant researchers, Command Cyborg, Doronku, Scott, Christopher, Lavender Lady, hello Lavender Lady, our friends Bots, Marigale, Unfinished Journey, Nana, Morton, Bo, Alex, and Paul. All of you are ever so much help to keep the project going as smoothly as we jolly well can. Because I now have more of an arrangement space on my desktop to put the laptop over here. I also didn't have room for my old wash light and the stuff that was used when I was doing videos from just the old computer camera. It means that I had a little bit of light reflecting off of my CDs back in there. So that was making the thing a little bit bright. I tried turning the light off, but that was a little bit too gloomy. So we're going this route. What I'll probably have to do is find some little piece of paper or something that will stick down over those CDs so that they're not reflecting the light back in here and producing a little wash. Because I tell you, if I turn the main light off and go on the camera thing, I look like death warmed over, and I'm not all that hot now. So we don't want to do that. I don't think we want to do that. So we'll get on to that. So anyway, as you know, we are plowing through Titans, the creationist dinosaur book from Sarfati and Tay that I picked up over in Idaho at Little Creek. We finally progressed up to chapter 3, where they're taught dinosaurs, systematics, and biology and all of that kind of stuff. Kind of, sort of, heavily weighted creationist apologetics that they're dribbling in. And we get a one from Clary himself in 2007, which is about an article that actually Clary, you have to remember, Tim Clary actually has a science degree. And he had, before he really got so associated with the creationist side of his personality, was doing stuff in regular science things. And so this one is not in a creationist journal. This is a piece that he did for the Geoscience bunch, the little commentary piece about the issue of endothermian dinosaurs, which by 2007 was becoming kind of a moot point, but nevertheless, it was still legitimate enough that it could do a regular science piece on this in it. And so he put that up on the ResearchGate, and I'll be putting the link into that. Now, what Sarfati and Tay are trying to do in referencing this and one other work, which is, well, actually two works. which we'll get to in a minute, on Owerkowitz and Crumpton on monitor lizards. And then some stuff from Alan Fiducia from his recent book, 2012, which I happen to have, but there's no way to put a link in that to it, so I won't be able to help on that little front. That it's relating to the issues of how do you identify warm-bloodedness or something that's a more complicated metabolism from various factors. One relates to bone histology, although it's not a done deal, and that was the point that was being brought up with this 1997 paper, Monitor Lizards, that I'll be putting a link up to. And this was being then reinforced in Fiducia's book, although what Fiducia, since I had the book to look at, what Fiducia was actually talking about there is whether you could tell whether early birds were as endothermic as birds are today. Birds have a higher thermostat than mammals do. But was that always the case? And how difficult that was to ascertain just from the little fossil information. Of course, the book itself is 11 years old. And of course, the 1997 paper is even older. So naturally, you kind of wonder, since they're Sarfati and Tay are writing in the 21st century, 2022, has there been some work since then on this? Well, yeah. And so there's a paper from Seymour et al. From 2012, which ironically is the same year that Fiducia's book came out, that explicitly took note of that Owerkowitz work from 1997 on the metabolism of monitor lizards, and related a bunch of other things in terms of blood flow that you could ascertain from the fossil data. And it was showing that reptiles are less active metabolism, mammals more so, and that dinosaurs, as far as we can tell, at least some of the ones that are studied, have metabolism rates that are above that of mammals, which isn't at all surprising, the idea that some of those are going to go sliding into the bird form eventually. Now, it's not the case that every dinosaur, ornithischians and large sauropods, which some of the newer systematics suggests are kind of off on a siding compared to the theropod group, may have no need of being warm-blooded. If you have a big enough body mass, in fact, being warm-blooded is kind of a disadvantage. It's heating you up too fast. And so if you have the kind of a gut microbia and all the stuff that's going on in a giant sauropod belly, it needn't be warm-blooded. But the interesting point is how superficial Sarfati and Tay were in bringing up this issue. And then all they've got is a very old article and a piece cribbed from Alan Fiducia, which I'm sure Fiducia and his 1999 book on birds and other stuff is going to play a big part, because he's got to be their star witness for trying to dismiss the bird-dinosaur connection. Not that that's going to help much, because this is now, again, a moot point. So what's going to be fun to watch later on when we get to those chapters where they're trying to pull off those tricks, how much of it is paying any attention to the criticism that Fiducia got, and the newer material that renders a lot of Fiducia's arguments about collagen fibers and all of that irrelevant. Well, that's a story we'll get to when we get down to those chapters. Isn't that exciting? The part 2 of the show has to do with a new name on the creationist block. Once in a while, you're starting to get some new critters popping up at ICR and AIG and CMI, and this one is one at AIG, Kaya Kloster, from just last year. And it's on Darwin's Challenge, The Origins of the Eye. Boy, creationists don't like the idea that eyes might have evolved. And it's a classic example that Darwin was fascinated with a long time ago. And of course, there's been oodles and oodles of work on all of this subject. So what is Kloster doing in his argument? He's... or assuming it's a he. I've actually seen a picture of the person, so it might be a woman. I don't know the terminology there. But if I've made a mistake on the gender, I'm sure the last people on Earth that are going to be offended one way or the other on this will be the transphobes at Answers in Genesis. But anyway, that he is continuing with the idea that eye evolution ain't a thing. Well, you've got the work of Nielsen and Pelger quite a long time ago, relating to modeling of how many steps would be involved to make eyes, and the fact that all of the examples that were being used as for the eye evolution are known from extant organisms, so we don't have to make any of that up. Well, they've got to find some way of getting rid of that argument. And so naturally, he punts to Elizabeth Mitchell at Answers in Genesis, where she, from back in 2016, thought to dispose of Nielsen's 1994 work without really paying attention to the fact that he had not stayed still after 1994. A post in Mitchell's case that has zero technical information in it. So that's going to be fun. I'll be putting the Answers in Genesis piece up in there. Now, a couple papers that are mentioned by Kloster along the way are kind of fun to deal with, because Kloster, at least, did mention, but did not discuss in substance, a more recent Nielsen paper from 2013. And then there's another one that Kloster didn't draw on at all from 2021 on the diversity of eyes and vision. And so I'll be putting the links up to both of those papers, and you can then compare what Kloster had to say about Nielsen 2013 and what was in the Nielsen 2021 to see how much of the stuff that he's been leaving out and how much data he's not actually getting into. It's not a terribly long piece, too. Let me see. It's in my little printout version. It's a whopping 5 pages, not tremendously long. What I tend to do to save information is if it's not available as a PDF, I convert it into a doc file. So I'll copy off the text and then size it down to a manageable size, typically 10 point, sometimes 11 point, depending upon how it's done. But anyway, you can see that I've then retained all the information that's in his stuff and put it down in ways that are easily visible to my old eyes and so forth and so on. And then I can save that as a doc file, in this case in July of 2023, Seattle, which was a file that I acquired this thing while I was over in Seattle for my great-grandniece's third birthday. So I can acquire things and plot them in a variety of different modes. But anyway, upshot is there was another paper that Kloster riffed off of, which was Songo Casey 2022. Now, that's a recent paper. From Cell, and it's on octopus eye cell types, which, when you read the paper, indicating the same thing that I've been mentioning in previous episodes about how creationists tend to try to riff off the initial research on a topic and then probably are never going to hear from it again. So in this case, it's pretty clear that this Songo Casey work is looking at figuring out what the data are, just starting to catalog all the different varieties of octopus cell types and working out details and suggesting stuff about potential genetic relationships and developmental relationships and phylogenetic relationships. Now, that work you can then put as a little peg, if you are an octopus eye groupie or an octopus groupie in general, to find out whether or not 5, 10, 15 years from now, the people at Answers in Genesis, and it may still be Kloster, who knows, will have paid any attention to any follow-up work that's done by that. And I would be darn surprised if those researchers packed up and stopped doing research on this subject to precisely work out the genetic systems and the developmental biology features and the insights that they can deal with for the development of cephalopod vision in the years to come. And at which point, future critics of creationism will be able to analyze the extent to which Answers in Genesis or CMI or ICR or whoever else is fiddling with the field by that time. And I don't expect them to go away because their ideology is way too strong and their imperviousness to data hasn't slowed them down so far for the last 50 years that they would presumably have done absolutely nothing on this, but they may or may not be riffing off of such future work. We'll find out what the case is on that. So getting back then to our little pals at in Sarfati, I'm really intrigued to see how superficial they're going to have to remain as they tiptoe through the dinosaur data field, because that's one area that I have been just gobsmackingly interested in for the last 40 years, independent of any of the research I do on creationism. And because typically creationists haven't paid a hell of a lot of attention to this kind of subject matter, there's not a huge amount in their own literature, baraminology and the like. They can't do conventional gee whiz research because there's no living dinosaurs other than the birds. So they can't do that natural theology kind of apologetics on things. So what they have to do then is to simply marvel at the creature from what we can do, and then try to fit it into the big flood scenario, because they don't want kids to think that they lived like years ago or not. So it's basically got to be an apologetic hit and run to defuse the potential problems they have for their apologetics. But are they going to explain much about anything? We'll see, but I'm not holding my breath on this. You'll be just from the papers that I'm putting up on this histology issue and warm bloodedness issue. Ye gods, the creationists are so far behind the curve on this. And since their model is useless, same thing with the intelligent design models being useless, they can never anticipate or explain anything. They can only retroactively try to shuffle the information that somebody else is doing to fit it into the framework. And that's kind of what I'm expecting to see happen later on in this chapter. So far, it looks like, and a spoiler alert for probably, maybe next week. I think we'll probably be bumping into it. But one of the papers that Sarfati and Tay linked to is one from Jan Pexis, who, for those of us who know the works that I've done, ding, 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 will be well aware of the fact that that is John Woodmack. And he was writing under a pseudonym, and it's a snotty little jerk. It's not at all somebody that I have great admiration for, either as a scholar or as a truculent person. Whoops, come on. Trying to get my little post in here. Wondering why it's... Come on. I'm not seeming to getting a posting on the comment section here. That's kind of puzzling. Well, we're still clocking along. Got my chat overlay on. There's no comment. Yes, it's not accessing the message in here, because normally if I should just hit enter, that should pop through, but it's not hitting. So we are getting something squiggly on our chat over. And so that means there may actually be an audience and I can't see them, even though the chat is operational. So I do not know whether or not anybody is actually watching or not. I guess if I can't see them, then I won't be able to know one way or the other. I apologize if, in fact, there are people out there and I don't know it. We'll find out. Anyway, it looks like we're going to be having about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more technical papers sprawling across largely recent material within the last 10, 15 years or so, it looks like. That presumably are, not all of which, by the way, are relating to dinosaurs. So it's going to be fun to see what context they're trying to use them and what the actual content of the papers are, and to what extent are they not dealing with relevant information that could have come up that would be predating their publication date of the book. So we'll be doing our best. It's one of the reasons why it's such a slow process to go through a source analysis on a work that at some point is bumping into technical literature, because there you've not only got to analyze the material that the creationist is directly citing, but also the material that they may have left out, and whether or not it's likely they would have left it out, or whether they've just done so because they're tremendously lazy and they haven't bothered to look. The very fact that so much of this stuff is from really high-end technical journals in paleontology suggest that I'm figuring that they're probably paying close attention. They're going through stuff to try to find material, which raises the possibility that if they don't bring up a topic, then it's because they don't want you to know about it. Well, we'll see how that goes. I've already pointed out that as far as I can tell, there's no list of kinds, dinosaur kinds. How many are there in their framework? It should be a number not ridiculously large. It should be something in the neighborhood of 20 or so, because that's how many dinosaur families there are. And given how dinosaur paleontology is expanding constantly, both in working out the dynamics of how dinosaurs originated at the time when mammals were just coming on the scene, but the climate shifting is such that the dinosaur metabolism, both with that upright stance and whatever metabolic edge they had, just caused them to proliferate like mad and spread all over the place. Not necessarily differentiating early, but becoming a very dynamic modality that was going to dominate planet for the next 150 million years. The creationist, of course, has none of that field to play with. So everything is all taking place compressed. That you've only got, what, 1,700 years, 1,500 years or so betwixt creation and the flood, during which the created kinds had proliferated into the forms that we would see preserved in the fossil record. And then, of course, bloop, dropping off the map after the flood, because nobody's arguing that they haven't gone extinct, except Answers in Genesis and the crowd do think that a lot of them didn't go extinct and got represented in stegosaur pictures in Cambodia and all that kind of stuff, which Sarfati and Tay are a little more circumspect on. They're going to have a section on it later on in the story, and so we'll go into more of those details then, but they're certainly not Paluxy Mantrack advocates, that sort of thing. But they do tiptoe into some of that weird cryptozoology crap that shows that their scholarly method is still pretty threadbare on that. It's stuff that's going to be mentioned in much more detail in Volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. Let me see if we can get our... We're still wondering. Nope, that's very puzzling why we are not getting that little symbol in there. Let me turn that off, and let me turn that chat overlay back on. Trying to get it to reactivate, and it's not. There it goes. Now, no, we are not getting a whatever chat overlay is doing, it's not connecting. So at the very least, then that covers the basic. We're coming up on about a half an hour. I was spending quite a lot of time today ferreting out some information on some of the little sidebar stuff. I had to wait until I could afford to get ink to get caught up on some of the little printing things. The top priority stuff is hitting PNAS Science and Nature every week to get their abstracts and the material, downloading the full text material. And anybody that follows me on Twitter will know that if I find some really juicy stuff on there that's full text work, I'll allude to it. A lot of origins of life stuff, material on systematic taxonomy, and a bunch of little topics that pop up where I go, ooh, that's a neat little paper, and I will link to it. Science and Nature are a little less prone to doing that, although both of them have open access sidebars. Science Advances for Science Magazine and Nature Communications for their end that are always open access material. And most of those eventually get published in standard mode in their regular publications. And along that, I'm now plowing down through my August file of document things, the same kind of stuff that I was doing with the Darwin's Challenge Origins of the Eye thing. That was from the a July file, but August is in the same mode. And so I'm plowing down through to get caught up now that I've replenished my ink supply to get them up and follow up on the source material. So there's old posts from Jerry Coyne on issues, in fact, relating to a recent snot that Jerry Bergman did, where he was trying to show how racist Darwin is and is riffing off of some sidebar papers that misrepresenting them. And Jerry Coyne actually wrote a thing on it. All of that's going to be showing up in the evolutionary racism section of Rocks Were There Volume 2 that Jackson and I are working on, because it's a highly relevant point, both for the history of it that has its ups and downs and ins and outs, and also the history that gets suppressed by the creationist movement. They never like to give the impression that any creationists were racists, even though, holy smokes, yes. And then clearly a creationist is not a Darwinist. So lo and behold, where would they be getting their racism from? From the religious tradition. And that stuff just gets airbrushed out as much of a revisionist as the Soviet Union was in airbrushing out liquidated generals and the like over the years, getting rid of Trotsky and all the rest. And so it's important to keep track of all of that material. And there's stuff on anti-vaxxers that is going to be figuring in one of the future books. We're keeping track of all that stuff. There's a little trope that was just popping up today where there was an article or an appearance on CNN where Fauci was giving an interview, and the interviewee was apparently riffing off of this stuff that had been circulating in the New York Times, riffing off and inaccurately off of a paper on mask usage in hospitals and influenza, the like. And it didn't actually have anything to do with the COVID issue, which is a different kind of way of different size particles, different issues of mask usage. This little piece on CNN was instantly being hailed by just a slew of people in the Trumpista network and the anti-vaxxer crowd, including people from the Epoch Times and all of that. So this daisy chain networking of source material happens all the time in Tortugan mindsets and shouldn't happen in the world of rigorous analysis. That when a thing comes along like this, let the dust settle a while until you can find out what the context of it is. Don't jump the gun on stuff. Or if you do want to call attention to a particular thing, always couch it in a set of contexts so that it doesn't get treated as a daisy chain fodder. It's easy to get yourself into that kind of mode with material that you see online. Sometimes the material may be inaccurate. We have chatbots and AI and propagandists from a variety of areas that like to sow discord and all of that. And we live in a time when we really have to be ever so careful and methodical in this area because we know the pitfalls of inaccurate information and inaccurate method. And it leads to troubles. It leads to Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Donald Trumps and Putin's and a whole bunch of other things. And information distortion and information misrepresentation has to be fought at every level. I was just, I made a comment to This Week that I had seen this morning when Vivek Ramaswamy was on there being interviewed, and George Stephanopoulos was asking him about the issue about Donald Trump and he is praised as the greatest president in the 21st century. And I'm going, no, sorry. And of course, just simply asking his positions on things and the notion about should the party even have somebody like that allowed to be on the ticket is a political issue that the politician can just spin around on. Well, Vivek shot his mouth off at the debate with the other Republican candidates on climate change. And of course, all of them pretty much are climate deniers. But Vivek went out of his way to make a big deal out of it. And that, dear hearts, is an empirical issue. It's an empirical science issue. It's therefore an empirical science source methods issue. And what has annoyed me about how reporters dive into these areas is they don't ask source methods questions. So what I would have liked to have seen on This Week with George Stephanopoulos would have been fine and dandy, asking him his viewpoints on Trump, and move on to probing what sources has Vivek drawn on to be so sure that climate change, anthropogenic climate change, is a hoax. Presumably he's drawn on something. Has he? Who? Postings at Heartland Institute? Technical papers, or at least ones that are waved by climate deniers, and there's a little cadre of those, not a huge number of people. And they do all sorts of little posts and things that get cycled through this network. And then, of course, the killer question, which is relevant, I would think, for anybody who wants to be president of the United States. Does he ever fact check what he says? You know, not just slips of the memory and ideological preference, but nevertheless actually trying to fact check empirical claims that are being used as the grounding for policy. And I'd love to know more about Vivek's method. And yet what we're not getting on these various talk shows and interviews is a source methods approach. So there's my little hobby horse that I continue to ride. One bad method to rule them all. That people who have Tortugan minds, first of all, shouldn't be in political power. They're dangerous, regardless of whether they're left, right, up, down, in, or out. It's because they can be reasonable in some ways, but then they can just go off into Club Cuckoo land at a moment's notice because their method is ideologically driven, not source methods driven. And the only way you can find out about those sorts of people are to let them get into power, and then you discover, oopsie doodle, you got a Donald Trump on your hand, or a Marjorie Taylor Greene. Or ask them about these things before they get to be in power, while they're still running for nominations. Now, it's entirely possible that, and probable indeed in the Republican Party, the Rhino Trumpistas, that they're never going to, the constituents aren't going to pay attention to any of those things, and will probably not be alluded to on Fox Trump Pravda or Newsmax or any of their propaganda networks. They'll just slide over it. But at the least, it would be the case that somebody in the media would be approaching these issues from a source methods direction to isolate the methodology, the source base, the fact checking or lack of it in how they arrive at where they're arriving. And I would contend that we will have a much more viable republic if we have more people paying attention to source methods and practicing it themselves and demanding that our political leaders embody sound methods. We won't get to utopia. There's always going to be constituents that are going to be voting in the Marjorie Taylor Greenes because they think just like the Marjorie Taylor Greenes. But it is an experiment that we can try to find out whether it will do a thing, that having more sound methods in play will begin to become more and more the norm for anybody that hopes to win an election, at least at the national level or at the state level. So we'll find out how that can go if we can ever get more people on that. So let me try then step 2, which will be to put my little Rocks for Their book thing up as a advert blurb. Now I got to scan over here and put that on. This mouse is so much nicer than that stupid tab. That's not the most comfortable approach for me. Okay, there we go. And let's get you going. There we go. Okay. And it's a nice little promo that Peter did Peter's now currently do this stuff with my co-author Jackson and also Aaron Raw and other people, and it's a delight. He's got a way nice graphic style and mixing and all the rest, way beyond my skill set. I'm very proud of the book. Jackson's very proud of the book. We're going to be jolly proud of Volume 2, which will probably be just as mammoth as Volume 1, because there's just so much information out there, and it's absolutely delightful. And Zot. Okie doke. And that got out of the way halfway decent. It's certainly been an invigorating process to go from pre-computer, pre-video on over the air, pre-technical papers that you could download at the drop of a hat, to the kind of environment that I'm operating in here. And although I look like death warmed over at times, nevertheless, I'm having a fun time. And it's exhilarating and delightful to acquire information that is of relevance to things that matter, and to the best of my meager abilities to share them with people, and write works that will presumably last past the time that I'm on stage. I don't plan on checking out for quite a few decades. Threats. So hopefully I'll be able to live long enough to finish all the various books with Jackson and others, and then all of my paralogs of Fog novels, of which there are still 10 to do. I'm working on the third one in the series of a dozen. And I want to get them all done because they're in my head, and oh gosh, they're going to be so much fun to deal with. And it keeps the other half of my brain very, very busy, because I've got so much delightful history to play around with, and I research all the various settings that I'm doing, and so I learn neat things about various places around the world and various places in time that I didn't know beforehand. And all of this kind of stuff, and this is what I would say an encouragement to writers of all type, is that so much neat stuff is available in one form or another freebie, to where you can find out absolutely fascinating material and just run with it. Whether it's historical, mystery, science fiction like that I'm dealing with, or whatever else you're dealing with in terms of poetry or art or scholarly works on whatever particular subjects you're interested in, a nonfiction material like Jackson and I are doing on our projects. This is a wonderful opportunity for people to be able to do all sorts of stuff, and at virtually no cost, in the sense that I don't have to pay for stupid little studio here, and I do have to keep the internet going and my ink and paper, that sort of stuff, but it's relatively minimal kinds of expenses compared to the laborious sort of expense that really required a well-heeled environment to be able to acquire scholarly work, to be able to get a high-level education in a major university kind of thing, to be able to travel and find the sorts of things you want to. How would somebody do the kind of research that I did for the Paralogs novel without traveling to all of those places if you were trying to write them in 1950 rather than in 2016? It wouldn't have been feasible. So anyway, that's a little bit of the hobby horse there. We're a little past half an hour. I still am not getting any legit. Let's see if that. I'm still not getting that damn chat overlay. It's not popping in. So if there's people watching the show, I apologize for not being able to see you. We did our best, and it's something foibly going on with Restream. Nothing I can do about it. And at least I'm not paying shelling out a pile of money. I've seen people who are paying a scad of money for their video platforms, and they can do much more ambitious kind of things that I'm doing. But nonetheless, they can get weird timeouts and all the rest, and they're doing it and paying money for the privilege. Nah, I'm not going to do it that way. We'll continue with what we can do as long as we can. So anyway, everybody stay safe. Watch out. There's super duper heat wave in the eastern U.S. We're suddenly kind of comfortable here in the Pacific Northwest. Light sprinkles and rains. We're kind of getting the kickback back from the edges of that big heat dome that's slogging along in the east. And of course, the people down in Nevada with the rock concert group that got mudded out. My gosh, and they looked, poor dears, like they were in the trenches of World War One. Oh my. Well. Welcome to the 21st century, where climate shifting happens in the most disconcerting ways, and if we don't do something about it, it's only gonna get worse. Well, see you next week, kids, and keep your eye out for wooden penguins. I know I do. Okie doke, and we will find our little exit button in here. Come on. There we go.